do with data, and the use cases are growing quite significantly. So customer demand is from this inherent global trend of data becoming more, let's say, more inherent, dominant in our lives. So that's the one part. The second part is that obviously as you drop prices, yes, your demand does increase. Twofold. One is as you drop the device price, your barrier becomes less, and then effectively increases your data devices go up. But also as you're dropping the price of data, you're going to go up as well.
Okay, thanks. And so what you're saying is, I'm also anticipating you're looking at the amount of data used per user per subscriber will be increasing. Probably not as much as that because you're getting a few new subscribers as well. That per user you're getting a substantial increase in the amount of data that's being used over time as well.
Yes, that's right. But you can see the revenue per customer is coming down.
I suppose that revenue is not coming down, per customer is not coming down as fast as the volume.
Correct. So you get your volumes are going up, your price is coming down, and then you're offsetting it with the number of user growth as well. So you can see there's three elements that normally determine customers grow. So your factors are your customers grow, your usage goes up, and then your price part of your effective price is a bit lower. So the three measures is what determines the revenue of a telco.
Right. And if you could just go back to the slide of prices and volume. Thanks. And just to check, that effective price per megabyte on the net, that is a price per megabyte actually sold or per megabyte used? So is it revenue divided by usage or revenue divided by purchase?
It's revenue divided by usage.
By usage. So if I'm looking at this, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding when I'm looking through
it's total revenue divided by total traffic, which is the effective price.
So if I'm looking at these two graphs and I'm seeing the effective price coming down over time, that must be driven, and I think you've said that must be driven to a large extent by the fact that volumes are increasing. Right? So you have value divided by volumes are increasing substantially, so this must be driven in part by your volume increases.
It's driven by that, it's also taken up by people buying. So you have a number of different effects, right? So you have the price itself coming down, but you also have people buying bigger bundles. So as people buy bigger bundles, the rates get cheaper. Okay, so basically what then happens is the effective price drops, so that plays a role as well. And then we have a lot of personalized offers and also daily, weekly, monthly. So people are optimizing and buying different things, and then obviously a lot of promotional activity as well. Buy one gig, get one free, that type of thing, all plays around.
Okay, so, and like you said, one of the drivers of that is people buying bigger bundles. So, are you, is part of this trend seeing users move, new users, existing subscribers are moving more into high volume products? So, by much bigger bundles that you may not even have it before, but you now have it because you've got the 4G, you've spectrum, and now bigger bundle offers that you have fully offered before.
So your bundles take the form of different things. So you've got bigger bundles for the day, you've got bigger bundles for the week, you've got bigger bundles for the month and so on. So that's the one part. But so just to give you an idea, I use 100 megs, say, in my first couple of months. Then I start to discover WhatsApp. I go to 150 megs.
Yeah.
I discover Facebook. I go to 175 megs. I discover YouTube. I go to 300 megs. So these are the type of. I decide now I want to watch video online. That gives you a different utilization. So all these factors, people are discovering more using the internet more, using apps. You know, you get apps for everything now. And all these things start to apps for travel, apps for getting around the traffic. You even get apps for sleeping. You know, so, so these things all you consume data.
That's not a PNG.
Right, okay, so
You have to.
I suppose just before the next question, just to maybe just go back one step slightly, is you were talking earlier on about how you've got, you have one thing like bundle, but it could be offered in various different validity, the method that's made. I mean, has that been a strategy that you've been implementing over the entire period on this figure, or is that more recent?
It's become more inherent, I'd say, probably in the last 3 years. And artificial intelligence and machine learning has definitely been one of the standout features of Killing. And we've seen huge success with it because customers have very much enjoyed getting more value for cheaper based on their personal consumption and usage patterns.
So I suppose my question is, from what we've talked about and looking at this, my understanding then would be that
to stream.
To a large extent, the
video.
increase in capacity and the technology changes that have allowed you to deliver more data on the right-hand side. It seems like what happens from this, to a large extent, maybe not exclusively, but to a large extent, is it builds in, like you said, it builds into, well, let me say it in a different way, where it impacts your effective price is that you've effectively got people buying more data, you've got people buying bigger bundles, you've got more high-volume consumers, or these consumers becoming high-volume consumers. So that effective price has really been driven by people's choices in terms of what bundles or how much data they decide to purchase, and knowing that high volume data is cheaper than low volume data. That seems to be my judgment from this, is that your capacity, the fact you're able to carry more, that's actually being passed on more to people in the sense that they move on to high volume usage patterns. Is that right?
So firstly, maybe just to reiterate, firstly, when it comes to data traffic, so the way I would think about the right-hand side of the graph is that's what you need the capital investment for. So you need the capital investment to be able to cater for this massive traffic growth. Now, one of the things that Vodacom does is, because we're part of the Vodafone broader group, we do have access to all optimization technologies. So I mean, you can think about the Indian market and the amount of capacity and so on, and also spectrum constraint and so on and so on. So we take all those learnings and we implement it, and we use technology to the maximum degree to try and optimize within a spectrum constrained, or frankly put, no spectrum environment. You're trying to optimize as much as you can all of these levers. So that's on the right, and that's what the 9.2 billion rand is for. On the left, you've done a couple of things. So you drop the prices on certain things. You've created smaller bundles to deal with, so that you're also helping the smaller consumer who's living more hand to mouth and so on. So you've created everything from hourly bundles to daily bundles to weekly bundles, and you've made it cheaper. Okay, so you have driven down your cost. Then you've driven down certain price points. So competition forces us to drive down certain price points. So we look at the elasticity of demand. We also look at, frankly speaking, we look at, are we losing customers? Are we gaining customers? There's the rate of customers that are converting or using data, or the amount of data that they're using, or are they dual SIMing? Are they using more than one network? Because many customers have more than one network as well. Can we get more of their utilization and so on and so on? So we take all these factors into account, and then we have to, we're in the normal competition environment, and we decide, okay, maybe we need to change this price point and so on. And so those are
and so it's a combination of things. It is that they're buying bigger bundles. It is that we've driven down the prices. It is that we've introduced new things like hourlies, dailies, and weeklies. It is that we introduced new price points that will increase demand and so on. And also that we have stretch campaigns, these type of things to try and get utilization. Also, we need to do certain things in certain areas. There's areas in the country where we're severely constrained spectrum-wise. There's areas in the country where we have less spectrum or we have less market share. So we can be a little bit more flexible in certain areas than we can in other areas.
Okay, so I take your point on all that. You've got a couple of factors. You've got people buying more or bigger bundles, but you've also got some of your strategic choices around selling bundles with lower validity periods, and that's part of also why effective prices have come down. But I suppose the question is, if you have someone who knows that they want to buy 1 gigabyte every month and they want their 30-day validity and they buy 1 gigabyte, and I take your point that there's lots more to this than a 1 gigabyte bundle for 30 days. But for that person who knows what they want and they know they want their 1 gigabyte for 30 days, if that person's looking at this and not seeing any benefit from the left or right-hand side of that graph, they're still seeing the same price for the last few years, which is the 149 Rand per gigabyte. So I suppose my question is, I mean, how is that person, the effective prices are coming down and that looks good, but for a specific consumer who's on that kind of bundle and who's not changing his consumption patterns and it suits him or her, that person is not seeing the benefit of the capacity change, of the technology changes, of the optimization.
They are in form of the promotions that we put out all the time. So example would be, there's a promotion currently running at the moment called Data Bonanza. Buy 1 gig and get 50% off the next one. And that's for all customers. So basically that's gone. Or buy through the app and you can get the gig cheaper. Or buy an app or buy a gig for the week and pay 79 Rand. Or what we've done is just added a second gig in for the night. So those are some of the changes that have happened just in the last couple of weeks, if you on those ones. But that happens all the time. So
But I suppose my question is, what this is saying, and what you're saying is, to some extent, you have been able to decrease your cost to carry, and that's why your effective prices are able to come down as well. Why don't you tend to see that benefit in pricing across all your products? Why is it maybe only on special offers or on shorter validity periods? And I know I'm focusing on it because it seems to be a point where comparisons are done, but that 1 gigabyte 30-day bundle has been, at least at a headline level, has been flat for a number of years.
So one of the difficulties in a telco is that if you reprice, I mean, just to put into perspective, if you take a price down by 1 Rand, okay, so say we took a price down by 1 Rand, that's a 540 million Rand impact to the bottom line. Okay, just on your, and that's across the board now, just using your 45, 46 million customers that you have today. So that's the impact. So you've got to manage it, and you've got to manage it. So one of the big things we do, to give you an example, one of the points where we've been taking a lot of pressure is on the bigger bundles from my friends Telkom sitting here, where they've driven the market prices down. That's competition. So we've had to basically get our act together. Not very good for us in the respect that bigger data bundles selling 50 gigs, 100 gigs have serious issues on the network. But we're losing those customers. So we've had to then start to say, okay, how do we be more competitive in that space? Now, when you just drop the price immediately, what then happens is the entire base will reprice. So you've got to manage it and essentially say, okay, I'm going to drop these price points, then I'm going to drop those price points. I'm going to. So it's difficult in a telco to manage all of that because otherwise other customers will. So you've got to drop, you've got to get the volume up, you've got to get the price down, you've got to deal with the price points where you're losing customers or you're not as competitive or you've got to balance multiple different factors. So to be honest, it is complicated. So you can't just say right across the board, it's 1 rand less or 5 rand less or 10 rand less. So that's just if you took 10 rand across the board, that's what's that, 5.4 billion, something like, yeah?
No, I take your point that there's a lot of complexity involved. I suppose my final question on this is getting back to the issue of spectrum is if you are assigned more spectrum and your spectrum scarcity issues are solved or released in some sense, the question then becomes, are we going to see, we'll see effective prices come down, you've said that, or come down more than they are now. Are we going to see benefits in terms of price changes across all your products, or is this only really going to concentrate on your high volume products or the lower validity periods? I mean, can every Vodacom subscriber or user expect to see a change in the prices if they're not adjusting their volume patterns?
Yes.
So you would see or expect to see a 1 gigabyte 30-day bundle come down in price if you got more spectrum.
Correct. So basically what we would then plan to do is to bring down the pricing. We've got to manage all the complexities. Also, we've got to manage that if we get spectrum tomorrow, we've got to roll it out first. And you've got to take it through to the 13,000 base stations around the country. So it doesn't all happen like immediately. But yes, it does to drive down your underlying costs. And you'll then start to bring down the different price points. I mean, we're also aware of where the pressure points are, right? And that, something like the 1 gig price point is the one that people are always comparing to. So that one will be one that we plan to address. It's just how much can you address at the same time, trying to build that virtuous circle right, because you have to also you have to put the investment in, you have to drop the prices, and you have to get some sort of return so you can continue to invest.
And maybe just to press that point slightly more, I mean, would you expect to see, if spectrum was released, would you intend or expect to see price decreases on the very small bundles, out of bundle rates? So I don't think you were here yesterday, but you would have heard a few of the consumer rights groups, NGOs, talk about the price of data for low volume consumers. Would you see a change right across your pricing plans?
Yeah, I mean, we already do that in a lot of respects with the smaller bundles and so on. So you can see it is dropped quite significantly there. Yeah, it will definitely be, I would say, across the board. So you would see the benefit of that coming in. I would say that, but here's the issue. Are we going to be sitting here in 2 years' time having the same discussion because the spectrum is still not allocated, and with the operators trying to manage all these complexities and bringing down the prices, the consumer pressures, all of these type of things? Customers want data to fall faster, and they're right. But we need the help to be able to achieve it. Here's the other opportunity. Here's 5G. 5G is, are we going to be a leader in 5G? Remember, South Africa has been at the cusp of these. We were one of the first countries in the world to launch 3G. To launch a GSM network. We invented prepaid for the world. Now we're going to be sitting back and be saying and having the same discussion on 5G that we're going to be sitting 5-6 years later after everybody else got spectrum having the debate, or we're going to license it early, because what it does do, 5G gives you the ability to emulate what fiber does. In my mind, 5G basically gives you the ability to do unlimited type offers and so on. It's big capacity pipes. It's optimal data. South Africa should be springboarding and saying, let's put in 5G technology as soon as it's available, because it will help us to get fiber-like connectivity more cost effectively to everyone. So that's what I would do if I was minister.
No, I take your point. So there's just a last sort of point on the pricing question. I just want to take you to your written submissions. I just hope I've got the right page reference, because I'm working off a slightly earlier version. but in page 47 in the annexure. So it's on my page 47. It might be on a different page in the newer version of this written submission, but it's under the heading ICASA, 8.2 ICASA.
What would you like to know?
Right, so you've got it in front of you. So just, I'll just read the first couple of sentences just for the audience. But here, Vodacom is referencing a study by CASA, and this is just an example. So I suppose more to, before I talk to this, is our experience with Vodacom submissions on this question of pricing and how prices in South Africa might compare to other countries, given obviously there are a lot of concerns and complexities with how you compare across countries. But this quote from an CASA retail tariff report says, the benchmark findings show that South Africa does not have the most expensive prepaid data bundle prices for the 500 megabyte, 1 gigabyte, and 2 gigabyte in the SADC region. It is also not the cheapest, however. Its prices are, and this is bolded in Vodacom's submission, its prices are below the average price of all the SADC prices across the categories. And it's something that comes through some of Frontier Economics reports that have been submitted to us as well. But there's this, what seems to come across is, whether it's Frontier or Frontier representing Vodacom, is that Vodacom is comparing South African prices to average. So it's an average in Africa, or it's a trend line set across various factors. And where Vodacom or South Africa, where Vodacom says South Africa falls above that average, that's seen as something good, and it says something to say that our prices are okay. But I suppose my question is a philosophical one, particularly within Africa, is whether we should be comparing ourselves against an average or not comparing ourselves against the best. Why is the benchmark the average? Why shouldn't it be something like the best, or a group of the best countries in Africa or even across the world?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. I think the reason you compare to averages, we're not saying we're the cheapest. We're not saying, and that's where the average becomes important, because it looks at what's the most expensive, it looks at what the cheapest are, and it says how do you compare to the average. So that's the one part. That said, I think it's fair to say, why should we be comparing ourselves towards the best? And I don't think we should be comparing ourselves just to the best in Africa, but we should be comparing ourselves to the best in the world. That said, we've got to take into account all the factors. Does those countries have access to spectrum? So it's and the GSMA index is actually quite interesting in that respect, because they do, which is different to what ICASA does, they do take into account the factors of spectrum and so on and so on. And you'll see we also compare, South Africa compares very favorably in that report, given the constraints that it has. Now, for me, we need to be looking at, but you got to come back to the virtuous circle that I keep talking about, because we have countries, honestly, we have countries where we have lower prices, but we also have a lower level of investment. We don't have the level of penetration, we don't have the quality, we don't have these type of things. So that is factual. You have to be able to get the results, the 99.8s and the 99 point so on, coverage, capacity, those speeds that you're getting and so on. You have to invest. So yeah, you can drop the price, but then you won't have the level of investment to be able to put in. You'll have crappy service, like you do. I mean, to be honest, I'm not that impressed with when I go to the States, as an example. I think the networks are atrocious when you compare to our networks here. There's many times where you can't even use the phone properly. So that's the one part. So you've got to look at all the different factors. And yes, you've got to try and bring your price down to the best. That's it. but also try and bring your cost down to the best. So, you know, I think we need two charts, cost and price. And it's fair to say if your costs are comparable, then your price should be comparable as well.
Right, thanks. I think that's fair. Then just moving on to the topic of competition, which we touched on earlier, where we see most parties making submissions to this inquiry and to the hearings are saying whether it's internet service providers or whether it's Telkom and Cell C, but and ICASA's priority markets findings document, there seems to be a lot of strong views expressed to us and submissions to us that the mobile market is not competitive. And I know we touched on this briefly a moment ago where you said, you know, everyone faces their constraints. But it seems like people, at least describing to us as the mobile market has been largely a duopoly between Vodacom and MTN. Is it your position that there are no competition issues in the wholesale and retail markets within mobile?
There's competition issues, and I'll show you at Telkom saying there's lots of competitive issues later on. Sorry, I see you there, so I'm just picking on you. But the reality is that there is certain constraints. The constraints are around fiber. The constraints are around ducts and access to facilities. There are some, so to give an example, the facilities, there's a lot of good things that do happen, so let's also be fair. Sites, facilities, these things are shared. We share with all the operators, so a lot of us share. So example would be on a base station, you typically have 3 or 4 tenants or 5 tenants, essentially, because we try and optimize the cost. We're trying to optimize. One of the big issues, as an example, is battery theft. So we're trying to do armed response together, these type of things, to drive down the cost, because to try and see how we can deal with the issues. So there's lots of areas where I would say there is cooperation. I would say there's more that can be done on access to ducts and poles, not just from Telkom, but from anybody for that matter. I think that would definitely help. Coming back to the wholesale part and the retail part, so I think the other thing that's important to realize, if you look at the Vodacom capacity constraints, it's important to realize that Vodacom has carried Cell C for 18 years on its network. So they've got spectrum, but they're using our spectrum. Because remember, they don't use their spectrum on our network. They use our spectrum. So we're even more constrained in terms of it. And Telkom has been using MTN's network. So there is that's the best part of wholesale. We're using Rain's network because we're capacity constrained. And so you know, there's a lot of cooperation happening from that perspective. There's smaller players like that. I saw some of the comments from yesterday. They're saying, "Listen, we need better wholesale prices." Yes, I can give you better wholesale prices, but I don't have it to give you. I don't have the capacity to give you. I'm struggling for capacity. So what do you want me to do? Make my situation even worse? I'm having to go to Rain to ask them to give me capacity because I don't have spectrum. So you want me to sell something I don't have? Snakes?
I don't know if I might add to...
Sorry, just one moment. I don't know if we have to do an oath or affirmation.
He's a legal advisor.
All right, so carry on.
So on the question of whether the South African telecoms market is a duopoly or not, factually, it isn't a duopoly. It's a fact that Vodacom has, I suppose, about 45% market share, and maybe MTN in the 30s. But you also have players like Telkom Mobile, as you do have Cell C. But fundamentally, a question from my perspective, if we're talking about whether the market is sufficiently competitive, how do you measure that? Do you measure that by virtue of the fact that you have 7, 8 competitors in a market? It's a fact that Vodacom has a presence in a number of countries across the continent. And if you take Tanzania as an example, theoretically, you would be told that you have 8 competitors. But question is, where do you find those 8 competitors operating? And typically, you would find them in the major cities. When you talk about national coverage, it would ultimately be the bigger players. But what we're seeing as a trend, not just across the continent, but around the world, there was a point when it was fashionable in the telecom space that you must have as many competitors as it's practically possible. But even advanced economies such as the US, Germany, UK, what we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is a reduction of the number of competitors from about 6 to 7 on average to about 3. And the question is, why is that at play? I think it's at play because it's a capex intensive industry. And then ultimately what you would have, the smaller players who really can't afford to invest as much as your consumers would expect, would be absorbed into the bigger players. And I think the buzzword today in telecoms across the continent and different parts of the world is consolidation. And consolidation is prompted by the fact that there is a recognition that for capex intensive industry, not just limited to telecoms, you'll always have a huge challenge trying to promote a policy of licensing as many operators as is practically possible. So South Africa, not so long ago, artificially, we licensed the users. And I think there was a multiplicity of them. And it didn't take long, maybe one or two were successful, but today there is possibly none existing. It's also true, if you put a question to the authorities in South Africa about the number of telecoms licenses that are available in South Africa, the number would be 250 or so. But in reality, there's about 5, 6 players that are competing in the marketplace.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think it's, from a wholesale perspective, if we have the capacity, it's easy to be able to say, okay, let's do more in terms of reselling it. But if you don't have the capacity, then you are severely constrained. And we do wholesale a number of the elements of the network where we do have it, whether it's sites, where we try and sell to as many tenants as possible, so we can try and bring down our underlying costs, to sharing in terms of fiber, where we were the anchor tenant on the creation of DFA, because we couldn't get better prices from Telkom, so we basically became the anchor tenant for DFA, which then basically supplies fiber to all the 250 providers that Snakes was talking about. I think the other thing just to remember in South Africa is we have 6 telcos. We've licensed 6 telcos. These telcos all have access to spectrum, from Neotel, now Liquid, to Rain, to Telkom, to Vodacom, to MTN, to Cell C. The issue is, how much are you willing to commit and invest in your market in South Africa? Now, if you're not willing to put the capital down, then you can't play in the telco space. Not you can't play, but you're not going to be as successful. you have to, one of the competitive elements is investment. And telcos are about investment. You know, so, you know, I always have I have a rule, and we put some of our assets in some of the countries up for sale. Because if we're not willing to put in the level of investment, we're never going to be a competitor. So, you know, we have an operation in Nigeria as an example, where we are telco. But we cannot, if we're not going to put in the level of investment, then we shouldn't be there. You know, and I think that's just the reality.
Okay, I mean, taking your words then, if you need to invest to be a competitor, and you also said it in your opening remarks that you said the difference between the large players and the small players is investment, and then investment gives quality. So the smaller players in this market, being Cell C and Telkom, and the broad understanding seems to be that they are investing less in capex than Vodacom and NTN. Does that not mean, from what you've said, that they are less able to compete with you because they're not investing in their quality as much as Vodacom and NTN?
No, there's more need. So let me put it this way. Firstly, think about it this way. Firstly, you've got Vodacom, you've got Cell C on Vodacom's network. You've got Telkom on MTN's network. So you've got they have the joy of using your network. So when you go and roll out rural coverage, it doesn't cost that you're not going to get the return on in a short space of time, or that site that you have to put up that you have to do because you're a telco in South Africa. They have that, they can ride on the back for free. Or when you have to go cover a stadium that doesn't, when you're trying to create capacity for 80,000 people for a game, and then the rest of the week it does nothing until the next game comes up, and they get the benefit of that. So the sharing is there. The telco operators through roaming have access to that. So that's part one. Part two is there's a number of solutions that you can operate on that have globally been deployed. If you're a smaller operator, one of the things that you can do is you have what we call netcos. So there's no reason why a Telkom and a Cell C can't get together and say, listen, I've got 5 billion to spend, you've got 3 billion to spend, together we've got 8 billion. Because they're going to, every telco is going to start building, I call it from cent and out. So you're going to start from the bigger cities and so on. There's no reason why you can't cooperate. There's no reason why Cell C can't talk to Rain, can't talk to Neotel and say, look, let's work together to build these towers, let's do these type of things. So they can, remember, they got the access from the tower from us. They can still put a common set of equipment. Now, that's what you're seeing trends around the world. People are doing more of that. Or you have an alternative model, which is effectively you have infrastructure layers, which could be your 4 or 5 operators today, and then you have a wholesale layer where you have your MVNOs and these type of things. We have MVNOs in the South African market, but you could have more of that. Now, we've chosen a different route in South Africa. We've chosen to say, let's create a wholesale open access network. So the smaller players can combine that spend and be able to achieve it. So this, which should have been happening naturally, is now being forced into a model which basically says people will share the capital investment in a WAN type structure. But so you need that, so your smaller players can go into the WAN in the future and be able to invest. But they do, I mean, we do have wholesale rates. There is options from Cell C, there is options from Telkom, there is options from MTN for wholesale access.
Okay, so I take your point that there's some wholesale access in that sense around roaming and MVNOs. But I suppose something that comes through Vodacom submissions is part of your strategy is to be the highest quality or to be a quality network, and that seems to be something that's the most important to Vodacom in terms of your strategy. And then one of your slides, one of the metrics for quality was speed, and it was showing that Vodacom speeds are the highest, or at least comparable with MTN, with everyone else a bit lower. I mean, doesn't that not point to the fact that despite that there's roaming and some wholesale access in that sense, despite that, Vodacom and MTN still have, let's just say Vodacom, I don't want you to speak for MTN, but Vodacom still has a higher quality of its network compared to Cell C and Telkom Mobile.
So that is changing, and that's because both Cell C and Telkom are now starting to look at options to roam on 4G and so on, and therefore will have access. So part of the modus operandi that the smaller operators were using was essentially to say we build our own 4G networks, right? And we'll take 2G, 3G. So realistically, we take the expensive part from you, and we'll do the more cost-effective, better stuff ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that strategy, but that then gave them the ability to approach it in a different respect. And that's why you see your speeds are lower. But the minute they start to do 4G roaming, which is imminent, basically what then happens on both sides, that then just changes the landscape, because then there's no speed differentiation.
And then something that was pointed out by Research ICT Africa yesterday and a number of other submissions is that market shares have been stable over time, that there's been relatively little change over the last 5 years between the four operators. What is your view of why that is? I mean, why haven't Cell C and Telkom Mobile not been able to take more from you, or take more market share from you, despite some of their pricing and promotions?
Well, I mean, if you look at both Telkom and Cell C's numbers, they've both been growing. So your customer shares are under pressure. Telkom is been gaining every year. I think Telkom's now at 5.5% market share. So they've grown, and 5.5% of a big number. So if you look at their results, they're growing 30-40% a year. So, you know, I think I would say, you know, if I was looking at Telkom Mobile, I think they've done really well. Rain has become a new competitor. They've added a lot of customers. They're growing. Cell C, you know, in their results show that they continue to grow. So, you know, I think also, I think that let me just say that a lot of the some of your growth comes from new customers, but also the growth comes from your customers on your base using more, or using more traffic and so on. So, you know, in my mind, yes, there's, and I think for when I look at someone like Telkom, I think Telkom is in the position where they have to decide how much money do they put into their normal market, which is fiber, where they have 85% market share, or how much market do they put into mobile, where they're a new player. That is a choice. They can put all their money into mobile. They don't have a lack of capital investment. They have a choice of where they put their money. Cell C is a different issue. Cell C, you know, needs more capital investment in my mind. They're doing it through roaming, but that's also a choice. They, you know, and maybe they'd have a lot more suitors had the regulatory environment been better, you know, and then there would be more people that want to invest into telcos. Rain has put a lot of investment in, and they seem to be doing quite well.
Then when Telkom Mobile decreased its price for the 1 gigabyte bundle to 99 Rand, a lot of submissions we're receiving are saying that Vodacom didn't respond to that. Whereas you've also now said that Vodacom, you felt, have responded to the larger bundles that Telkom Mobile released. What is your view on that? Why didn't, if that's correct, why didn't Vodacom respond to that change in the price for the 1 gigabyte bundle from Telkom?
For all the reasons I explained. It's very difficult to do everything at once. I had to put priority on the smaller ones, the daily ones, the weekly ones, that type of thing. added in recently. So you look at the competitive parts, you see where we added a gig extra in terms of night data. Now, is that completely comparable? I think the consumer basically can judge, but you know, we've had to respond in different ways through promotions, those type of things. So you know, on some of the bigger ones, we've also had to change the 2 gigs, the 5 gigs, or what we call, you know, some of those bundles as well. We'd like to respond, but I have to take in the virtuous circle. If I drop the price now, I'll end up with a big loss, which essentially means that I don't have the money to drop the prices for everybody else. And as you asked, do I drop it across the board? So that's the issue. But also, I need the money to be able to invest, because without doing anything, with that traffic growing 50% a year, I need the 9.2 billion to put in to just keep up with the pace.
I suppose my point is, surely if that 99 Rand 1 gigabyte bundle was hurting you or constraining you, then you would be losing revenue anyway, and therefore you would want to respond. So your response sounds to me like it wasn't affecting you enough that if you drop the price on the 1 gigabyte bundle, you would be losing so much revenue. If Telkom was competing with you in that specific part of the market and was taking customers away, then you would think that some kind of response or a price drop would make up for the revenue loss of losing customers.
Yes, and I have 80% of my customers buying daily, weekly bundles. So this is my response. I introduced 12 Rand, 29 Rand, 79 Rand, 99 Rand bundles. So I've responded, and I've added an extra gig on the top. So I've responded in a different way. As you can imagine, it's not easy sitting in a telco being able to balance all the factors. But these are choices we make in terms of pricing, and we have to measure it. Sometimes, honestly, it's not the right choice. And then you have to respond. And then you feel it. And once it's biting you, then you basically respond in a different way. But, you know, I would say the market is very competitive from the perspective that customers respond to what Telkom's doing. That's why they're growing. To gain 5%, 5.5% market share and growing 30-40% in Telkom, it can't be an uncompetitive market. The Cell C showing good results and saying that they're growing at the rates they're growing can't be a bad result either. So, I mean, you also got to look at, you know, it's not logical to say, listen, I'm growing 30%, but the market's not competitive. I'm growing 15%, but the market's not competitive. Then where are you getting it from?
Okay, thank you. Last question on this before I move on, because we are running out of time. Last question on competition. A lot of submissions were received that says that Vodacom has the first mover advantage. So pointing to factors like, you know, existing scale before other operators came in, the fact that the first movers and telcos can get the best sites, high sites, or the best sites for coverage, that it's easier to attain customers, or at least retain customers once you've got them and they're long-standing customers, and also the benefit of having national coverage that you can control the roaming arrangement. Do you agree with the submission that Vodacom has a first mover advantage?
Look, I think it's fair to say Vodacom and MTN, not Vodacom, Vodacom and MTN were licensed at the same time. So that's the first part. I don't buy the access to site story, to be honest, because Vodacom was built on top of the Telkom network. Remember, Telkom owned 50% of Vodacom. So Vodacom actually was built on top of the Telkom sites, and so that's the first part. It is true that if you've been you do have the part of being but that's telcos all over the world, right? It's not unique. You license one or two players. Of course, the one or two players have the ability to grow. But again, it comes down to, did they invest? So in many places you find that even if you were first, right, you didn't really end up being successful, or first or second, because what typically happened is governments license like the state-owned entity, which is the same thing they did here. They licensed the state-owned entity, which is Telkom. So Telkom owned 50%. And then basically Telkom found a technical investor to work with it to be able to launch Vodacom. Transnet was basically one of the biggest shareholders in MTN. So government made sure it had its hands in everything. So you know that's the part where. But in many countries, what happened, because government was an investor, the capital investment didn't flow, right? And because the capital investment didn't flow, you know, it didn't work. Here, what happened was the investment did come and continued to come, and that's why you've had the success. So it does come down to, did you put the money in? Here's a case in point. You've got a number of players in the South African market that have been, you've got 6 big operators that are sitting with all the spectrum and so on. Why haven't they invested? Why are some people sitting on spectrum for years and have done nothing with it? Not little, nothing. So you're sitting with spectrum constrained operators on the left, and you're sitting with people sitting with a lot of spectrum doing nothing with the spectrum. Some are waking up of late, and some are still doing nothing. So you know that is a big issue. So we're starving and we want prices to come down on the other side, and we've got people sitting on spectrum on the other side doing nothing with it.
Sure, just one more point. I won't labor this too much. Trying to find the reference in your written submissions, but effectively you say something to the effect of your investment, so I won't use a proportion, but just I'm worried about confidential information. But effectively you say something around your CapEx investment has really been funded from profits. So has that been a first mover? Has that not enabled you to fund that CapEx, so to keep ahead of the game in terms of how you've invested versus the smaller operators who come in later?
Look, you're taking, so telcos around the world have to continue to invest. You could have cut your investment, you could have taken it and said, look, let me go to Nigeria and build a big network. Or you could have said, listen, I want to stay in South Africa and put most of my money into South Africa. That's what Vodacom has done. It didn't choose to go and have 25 countries. It chose to have a few countries and make sure that it properly capitalizes those markets. So it's a choice. You know, we have 5 markets plus our investment in Safaricom, 6 markets. We make sure that we invest properly into each of our markets because we believe strongly that part of the recipe of success is investment in a telco. So, you know, if you'd like me to slow down investment so everybody else can catch up, we can have that discussion. But you know, this is part of being a telco. You have to be willing to put the money in.
Okay, that's fine. Let me just move on to the second last topic. So one thing that came out of yesterday's submissions at these hearings was the difference in pricing on a per megabyte basis between low volume consumers and high volume consumers. So some of the evidence that was brought is on very small bundles. A low volume consumer might be paying over 600 Rand per gigabyte effectively, whereas a high volume consumer might even pay less than 20 Rand per gigabyte if you're buying extremely large bundles for long periods of validity. I mean, do you accept that low volume consumers are paying much more for data than high volume consumers?
No, because you have these offers. So essentially there's a lot of different offers available. Yes, bundle rates do differ. And as you start off with higher and you go to lower based on the volume, that is factual. But you also have validity, which changes the model around the other way. So based on the validity, the period, so the shorter the period, if you buy a day's bundle, you're paying 29 rand for a gig. So these, and your prepaid customers, as I was showing, 80% of your prepaid customers choose to buy daily, weekly, monthly. So they actually have cheaper prices than a lot of your, than some of your bigger bundles.
And I suppose the question is whether they are buying some of those lower validity bundles because of an affordability issue. So in some of the, I think it's in your written submissions, they're called sort of sporadic consumers that might only buy a little bit of data here and there for a day, but you know, why for a low volume consumer who wants to buy 20 megabytes a month and is able to plan their purchase from their paycheck, why, I suppose, no, let's not say why, do you accept in that case, if you've got comparing apples against apples, two people who want their data for a month, a low volume consumer is paying significantly more than a high volume consumer on a per megabyte basis?
So your prices do, reiterate, your prices do go down, but also I think it's important to note that you have those same low user customers have access to free data like free Facebook and so on as well. And then they also have a lot of promotional, so they get daily promotions in the Just For You menus and so on, where most of the customers are actually buying these promotional offers. So when you look at your effective rates across the different bundles, it's interesting to see that there isn't a huge differentiation, or those gaps narrow quite significantly. But also, it is in competitive environment, right? So if this is not the right strategy, then the MTNs, the telecoms, and the Cell Cs have also the ability to come up with a different strategy, and customers will vote with their feet, right? Or rather, in this case, with what they'll buy. So it is, you know, they do have the ability to choose which offers they prefer. So, you know, for us, the personalization bundles is a huge success and is world leading, and customers are enjoying it because they go in, they like the shorter validity, and it's changed the profile of our business quite significantly. You know, and customers are liking that ability to buy. Now, you can have different strategies, and I think that's what happens in a competitive environment.
So I hear you that you're saying that you've got different options and their promotions. There's some free data as well that you've talked about, or free services. I mean, given that, I mean, why? I mean, I suppose if you've seen some of the submissions and what was presented yesterday, and what we've seen over the last 2 years in South Africa, it comes across as an outcry against data costs, particularly for low volume consumers. I mean, is that just people with the wrong perception, that they're getting it wrong, they don't understand that they've actually got products to reduce costs, or is it actually that what they've been offered doesn't actually meet their needs, and you know, they're buying a one-day bundle because it's all they can afford, and there's an urgent need for data rather than actually a choice that they want to make and the way that they want to deal with their service provider. So I ask you this question because this is the submission we've received, that people are unhappy, that poor consumers are saying, or low volume consumers are saying, that they're paying exorbitant amounts for data. They easily slip out of bundle because they're buying a one day bundle that might last for such a short time, and it's difficult to monitor. I mean, none of us really know how much data we use in a day. So that's my question. I mean, do you think it's an unreasonable complaint? It seems to be based on numbers and experience.
Yeah, so look, I think there is certain things that the industry needs to improve on. I think that's fair. I think the concept of in-bundle and out-of-bundle creates noise. I think and obviously we were upfront with ICASA, and we said, look, we accept that the in-out-of-bundle needs to change. It's funny that the market started with in and out-of-bundle the same. Customers, then competition, forced it the other way. Competitors came in and actually decided to create this gap between in-bundle and out-of-bundle. Customers liked it, voted and went that way. Then the rest of the industry had to change to in and out-of-bundle. Now it's the reverse. Customers are saying, well, in and out-of-bundle should be the same. So it will change, and I mean what we did is we decided to drop out of bundle rates in October last year, and we're now waiting. We're going to do another drop now, but we're waiting to finalize the CASA part, which is supposed to be implemented soon. That will help to deal with the out of bundle issue because it needs to be dealt with. So there is certain, let me be frank in saying there's certain hygiene things that we need to do. One of it is the out of bundle rate. There's certain price points where that creates more noise. We need to deal with those. But it's a multitude of factors that you're trying to deal with at the same time. And therefore, and that's what I'm saying, from a competitive perspective, there is opportunities for wholesale providers, for MVNOs, for smaller players to basically decide, look, we're taking a different construct. That will create competition. That's what a competitive environment is. And essentially that then forces you to respond. We have to look at our full offer to our customers. One is, and we do a multitude of different things. One is the prices and the bundles. Second is the loyalty stuff. Third is the special offers that come, the upsize bundle. So you buy 100 megs, you immediately get an offer and say, well, would you like a little bit more for only a rand extra type of thing. That drives down your effect. So there's a lot of different modus operandis that each of us use that's part of a competitive environment.
One of the recommendations that came out from a few submitters, a few of the presenters yesterday, was that MNOs in South Africa should be regulated, or there should be some kind of regulation that limits the level of price discrimination across products. So either flattens out that price curve between low volume and high volume, or even goes to a scenario where there's a flat rate across all data. If hypothetically Vodacom were forced or faced with such a regulation that in some way limited the extent to which you could differentiate or discriminate between different volumes of consumption, how would that affect you, and what would your likely response be in terms of how you price, or how your pricing strategy?
Look, I think it's dangerous to get into to regulate what happens in a competitive retail environment. Because what you're then doing is you're trying to force a particular modus operandi. That creates less flexibility in competition. So if we have places where we have price floors, so you can't sell below a certain price. The reason they've done that is so they can collect taxes, and also so they can make sure that they get the right taxes out, but also to encourage investment. Those things are possible. But do you really want to go down the route of trying to, because if you did that, an example would be if you fixed all of that and you said, right, everything is 10 cents a meg or 15 cents a meg, then you wouldn't have the ability for customers to buy a gig for 2.9 cents for the day. Right? And you say 80% of your customers are choosing to do that. Do we really want to upset 80% of the public by telling them they have to pay 10 cents or 15 cents a meg?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it would depend how it's implemented, but I take your point. I think it's just 3 more questions from me. I know we're running over time, but I think it's worth it. So another recommendation that was made yesterday, I'm not sure if you've had sight of it, if your team has briefed you, but the DG Murray Trust talked about their proposal was to have a 0 rating of certain content, and you've explained that you do that in effect anyway, but to have that funded from your SED obligations. So there would be some level of reverse billing on certain applications that are from public benefit organizations. I mean, what's your view on that? I'm not sure if you've been briefed on the submissions.
I haven't been briefed on it, but I mean, we're open to that. We think that there is, and that's why we've done the universities, that's why we do the jobs sites, that's why we do free education. We do think it's a necessity.
Okay, thanks. And then just second last question is the Internet Service Providers Association, who presented yesterday, made this point that the MNOs, and I think they're referring to the large MNOs, are talking to spectrum scarcity, saying there's not enough spectrum, and we've talked about this today already. But what his point was is to say that if you've got a situation of spectrum scarcity, you've got the scarce resource that you're trying to use. His question was, or his view was, that it doesn't seem to make sense that if you've got scarce spectrum, you would price lowest to your highest volume consumers. Because if you're limited in how much your capacity on your network because of spectrum, why are you essentially incentivizing large volume consumers with the lowest prices?
For competitive reasons. You're right.
Do you want to expand on that?
So, let me put it this way. 100 gig bundles, 200 gig bundles, 50 gig bundles, 20 gig bundles are actually, they have the ability to create, the more of it you sell, the more spectrum constrained, the more of the capacity it eats up, right? That is factual. But someone like Telkom and Rain have been very, very competitive in that space. And they have forced the market down. They have forced the market down in terms of their pricing. And you try and, it's the 1 gig story, is how long can you sit it out? How long do you have that discussion for? That type of thing. And until today, I mean, the one who's selling the most in that space is Telkom. And the reason why? Because it's swimming in spectrum in those high bands. So it can afford to have those alternatives where the rest of us can't. So your logic is right, but you know, you have to take into account all kind of competitive stuff and see what you do. So, you know, what the response would be that you create bundles. You're not the cheapest. You hope that the quality of service that you're providing would stand out for you against your against some of the players who are more aggressive in that space, and you do it because you have to.
Thanks. So last question. We often promise last questions, but I think it is my last question. Just changing topic slightly to the WOAN. Just a practical question, but from your understanding of the WOAN currently, what it's likely to be or likely to become, what would Vodacom need to do practically and in terms of investments to provide the capacity on the WOAN at the frequencies that the WOAN will get? So effectively, I mean, would there be costs for Vodacom? Would there be infrastructure changes in terms of antenna or the way masts are arranged to both broadcast on those frequencies, but also to have the right, I understand, direction of those antenna on the mast? But maybe you can give me a rundown from Vodacom's perspective of what you believe you would need to do to provide that capacity to the WOAN.
So it's the other way around, eh? The WOAN's going to provide capacity to us.
In the end, but at a wholesale level, they're carrying on your network, right?
Yeah. So look, what the WOAN would have to do. Let's be clear. The WOAN would have to invest into its network, create the level of capacity. What it would require from us is access to sites. It would require access to transmission, which would be either Telkom, DFA, predominantly in that market, but also where we have, or MTN is, you know, and CLC could also provide access to that. So one would be access to facilities as such, which would be, you know, like I said, we do that anyway to all the operators. So that's the first part. Then the idea is that we would buy 30% of the capacity that the WOAN creates. So the industry would buy at least 30%, or at least, let's say, the bigger telcos would buy at least 30% of the capacity of the WOAN. Then it would have the ability to resell the remaining portion of its capacity to some of the 250 other licensees, who can then create its own services, which will create additional competition. So that's really the idea behind the WAN. What's not clear is what the WAN will want to wholesale from us. So that part needs to still be worked out. And you know, what does the WAN want to do? So the WAN would typically come on, try and use your site, and so they won't have the cost of the sites. They'll pay, you know, it'll probably end up being a rental or and so on, and then effectively put the antennas on top of the masts and so on.
Okay, so your understanding is that the WAN would share a site in the same way another MNO would do, so you'd give it a position on a mast, you'd have to get access to that, and you would have to put an antenna on that mast and then connect into your network on the backhaul.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. I think that's all from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Prosky. Dr. Mnobe.
Good morning. I have one question, and I really want to invite a comment from you from a proposition that came up strongly yesterday, which is that to reduce the data prices, the inquiry must focus on the wholesale market for data services, and that the solution should be along the lines of imposing obligations that require Vodacom to offer wholesale open access on non-discriminatory terms, or even think about vertical separation as a solution. And the suggestion is that on Vodacom's roads, it is only Vodacom alone operating, and if many more players were encouraged to be also on Vodacom's roads, that would increase competition in retail markets, which will ultimately lead to data prices coming down for poorer consumers.
So my response would be that, firstly, to have more, first you've got to start with the first ingredient, and the first ingredient is, do you have capacity? Because if you're sitting with excess capacity, there's a case to be said about why don't you wholesale it? But if you don't have the capacity, what then are you going to resell? So remember, we are doing the biggest one, which is not necessarily the small operators, but we're doing cell C. So you've got that wholesale access through a roaming arrangement, which you're providing through to the biggest operator. Now here's the funny part: the MVNOs then use that, and they go to cell C and they buy through cell. They're using the Vodacom network anyway. So that's the one part. So they have access to the Vodacom network via cell C, but because of our capacity constraint, it's very difficult for us to be able to cater for more and more players. We're not opposed to doing more. I call it more MVNOs and these type of things. The problem is we need the capacity to be able to do it. So Spectrum will give us capacity, and then if some may take on more MVNOs, some may take on less MVNOs, but that will be the dynamic. In my experience, having been in Spain, where we had a big MVNO market, what then happens is because of the competitive part. So if you've got MVNOs will sometimes move around from network to network and so on, to be able to get better deals. South Africa's chosen a different route though. So one of the solutions that you could come up with, MVNOs is something that you do see in markets, right? But then you don't have a WAN. You're choosing a different solution. You're choosing a WAN solution versus an MVNO solution, right? I can tell you what I would have personally done. It would have been the MVNO part versus the WAN, but let's just say the overwhelming sentiment from the same people, by the way, was that they want a WAN instead. So now you've got to decide, which one do you want? If you want to give the spectrum to the industry then it's going to have more capacity. Then it's fair to say, well, why don't you do wholesale open access? But if you're going to take the spectrum and put it into the one, then you're taking away the additional capacity that could potentially be part. You've chosen a different, if one can call it a remedy, a different form of remedy. And a more complicated one at that. The MVNO model is a more tested model. The one model is an untested model. So, you know, personally I would have gone a different route, but I'm not the minister.
Thank you.
Mr. Mahoma?
Just on the slide that is currently showing here, please just explain to us practically why does a 1 gig, which is valid for an hour, cheaper than a gig valid for 30 days? And the second question is that, given this limited number, do customers actually utilize all their bundles? So, for example, someone who buys a gig which is valid for an hour, do they actually utilize that bundle given the limited time period?
So you have customers with choice. You're right in saying some customers, but they feel it's a confidence, right? So I buy a gig for the day, say for 29 Rand. Even if I use 800 megs, I know I've got a better rate. So from a telco perspective, you get a higher you might end up with a higher effective rate, so the 29 might become 33 in reality once you do the revenue divided by the traffic. So that's the one part. What you're also doing is you have the ability with these things to look at when the network is fully utilized or not. So you can basically, you're using the daily hourly bundles to try and increase the traffic in a particular period, and by using the personalization, you're presenting customers with these options to try and better balance the traffic in certain areas, but also in some of the days. It's a different way of giving customers a lower effective rate. So it's a pricing methodology. You could choose, your colleague mentioned, you could have a flat rate across everything. You could say, listen, it's 10 cents a meg or 15 cents a meg across the board. That is a pricing methodology. You could do that. We've chosen a different one. And that's far, and also, to be honest, things change, right? So if it doesn't work, you change it. This is the methodology we're using at the moment, and it seems to be resonating very well with customers. They're liking this concept of cheaper bundles, shorter periods. Because you do have a big portion of the base who buys more hand to mouth.
And then, from this perspective, maybe just explain to us: is it then cheaper to? So, what is the cost difference between these validity periods?
So your costs are more or less. I mean, it depends what you look at, right? But your cost to carry a mega of data or a gig of data would be similar across the board.
Okay, thank you.
Mine is just follow-up questions from the questions which have been put by my colleagues. I'll start with the first one, and I'll ask my colleague to hand you this document. It's a submission from Amandla.mobi, which was made to the Commission and was also presented yesterday. You will see on the second page of the submission, this is the page which has the heading, the main focus of the submission. And if you start at the bottom of the page, at the second paragraph, from the bottom of the page, and I quote the submission, it says that research conducted by researchers at the University of the Witwatersrand, Cape Town and Rhodes, soon to be by the highly regarded Institute of Development Studies in the United Kingdom among low-income consumers suggests that average, I think it meant to say on average, low-income consumers are purchasing data in much smaller quantities. I think it meant to say here than 1 gigabyte. Then the submission goes that it suggests that these consumers are buying data in quantities as low as 20 megabytes to 30 megabytes. And some of these consumers are using mobile data without buying data bundles. Then a submission is made that it is our contention that low-income consumers are paying disproportionately high charges and are not seeing benefits of competition in comparison to high-income consumers who are able to buy larger quantities of data. And then on the next page, the submission references a table which illustrates the pricing of this smaller bundle in comparison with 1 gigabyte bundle. And the submission then concludes by making the proposition that, and you'll see this is the bolded part, it says that this means that those consumers who are using small data bundles or using data out of a bundle may be paying 50 times what richer consumers are paying. And this submission also converges with another submission which was also made by the DG Mary Trust. So there appears to be convergence in the submissions that low-income consumers seems to be getting a raw deal in the pricing of data. And this is what the table seeks to demonstrate. If I could just have your comments.
I think, so, you know, I mean, without reiterating all I said, but I can immediately tell you that this table is wrong. I mean, firstly, the outer bundle airtime using airtime at 150, this thing is like a year outdated. Okay, so that price is 99 cents and 89 cents. So we don't have any tariff with 150. So this is completely wrong. Secondly, you can just see that this thing is illogical. I don't know where they got it from, but basically, if you look at the table on the top, if you look at the one being presented, this says a gig is 29 rand for a day, right? According to this, 250 megs is 25 rand for 1 day. So why would you buy 25 rand for 1 day for 250 megs when you could buy 29 rand for a gig for 1 day? Right. So this thing is wrong. I think the principle that you pay a bigger rate from a small bundle and it gets cheaper as you buy more is correct. But these comparisons are all wrong. You know, so I think the writer needs to update his data on the one side. But I think conceptually, to deal with the question that you're really asking, is customers, the methodology is, and you know, I've upfront said that the outer bundle rate needs to be out. So I've accepted the side that it's a fixed rate throughout. Those are options. But you do have a situation where the more you buy, the less you pay. That said, you've also introduced, you know, cheaper 1 gig bundles and so on, so customers can buy it. And obviously, if you make the 1 gig 29 rand, it just means that everything below it gets a lot cheaper. So you do have a situation where then, because the methodology would be that the rest would also be cheaper.
Yeah, indeed, the data is from it's about a year old, but the same point is also made by the DG Mary Trust. I'll also request my colleague to hand you a copy of the submission for your comment. And you will see that on the second page, and we accept that as you can see that these submissions were received, particularly this one was received in October last year. But it also makes the same point on the second page, and I quote where the submission starts by saying that it will appear that mobile networks take advantage of poorer South Africans by charging them disproportionately high rates. One, wealthier individuals that qualify for post-paid contracts pay approximately half the cost of prepaid users for 1 gigabyte of mobile data and receive even greater discounts when purchasing more data. Two, poorer individuals who pay 12 rand for 30 megabytes equal to, in brackets, 400 gigabytes often pay 10 to 30 times more for their data than wealthier individuals that, for example, can afford to buy 100 gigabyte of data valid for a year at a time for 15 rands. South Africans living in poverty are more likely to run out of data and be exposed to excessive out of bundle data rates. Notification of when users are out of data tends to be erratic and unreliable. Mobile data operators promote certain data bundles that expire within a few days, making it more likely that users will end up using very expensive out-of-bundle data without their knowledge. Data should also be rolled over for at least 3 months to allow for changing usage patterns. 4, while mobile operators try to appear to reduce data prices through special offers, these offers are often complicated, difficult to understand and redeem, and designed as not to be easily comparable to other offers, and are often temporary in nature and require extensive effort on the part of the user. Prepaid mobile offerings can be highly confusing even to the most astute users. So there is convergence in the submission that users who are poor seem to be paying disproportionately high rates than the more wealthier or high income users, in the light of these considerations. So are these concerns valid or legitimate?
So I think so a couple of things. Firstly, there is no differentiation between prepaid and contract customers in terms of bundles. So bundles are exactly the same price regardless of whether you're a prepaid customer or a contract customer. Only difference is that in contract, some of the contract plans come with inherent data in the plan, and as I explained earlier, you got to look at when you're looking at the cost of that, you got to take out the device and so on and so on. So that's the first part. Secondly, it is true that you go from a smaller bundle where you pay slightly higher The bigger the bundle, the cheaper the bundle gets, right? Which is no different to any other industry. If you in many industries, if you're buying one by one, you pay. The Gautrain is an example. If you buy a one-day pass, you pay a certain rate. If you buy a 3-day pass, you pay a lower rate. Effectively, if you buy a 7-day pass, you pay even lower rate, and that's true for multiple different industries. So that is factual. That said, on the very big bundles, and it's an unfair comparison because the big bundles are a different market completely. They're not more, more dongles, these type of things that you put into the data-only SIMs. So they are different. That's where, as I explained, we've been taking heavy competitive pressure, and we've had to, and we're losing customers, so we had to adjust certain price points. We're still not the cheapest in that respect, and that's where Telkom, Rain, and to some degree Cell C have been quite aggressive in terms of price points. Now, does it completely logically make sense? I think some of those bundles, as I said, they do take up a lot of capacity, but that's where that's what you have when you have a competitive environment. Telkom can explain to you its logic of why it charges more for, or so much less for bigger bundles. Part of their reasoning is they're using it as a fixed wireless replacement because the copper gets stolen. So they're using it like a fiber replacement. They have the capacity in the spectrum to be able to do it. Now, do you stay out of that market completely? Don't you stay out of that market? These are the competitive considerations that we've had to deal with. Then for a while, we tried to stay out, and it kind of bit us. So we had to kind of make a response. Now, are we the cheapest in that market? No, and that's where we try and differentiate in quality and service. But that's where competition takes you. Now, the same with the lower bundles. We have competition every day. That's why we've introduced the 7-day, 1-day, 1 hour, 14-day bundles. It's proven to be successful. How successful, again, is depending on the competitive environment, and the environment is such that every day someone is doing stuff. I mean, just yesterday I was looking at some of the crazy offers from MTN, but, that's how we compete. The next day it's Telkom, and the following day it's Cell C. And then you have to respond. But that's what a competitive environment does. It does sometimes, and you sometimes feel the impact very quickly because customers do have more than one SIM.
The second question is a follow-up question to Dr. Mnube's question. And I would also like to take you to the submission made on behalf of Internet Service Providers Association. And my focus is on paragraph paragraph 10 of the submission. As Dr. Mnube has indicated, the thrust of the submission is that dominant mobile network operators there should be obligations which are imposed on them to offer wholesale open access to their network on a non-discriminatory basis. And a second aspect of the submission is that there needs to be functional separation that is effected for vertically integrated incumbents to underpin these wholesale open access obligations. And if I'm following your response to Dr. Mnube correctly, you have referenced constraints relating to spectrum and capacity. Is there any other constraint? Maybe let me start there. Is there any other constraints other than what you have referenced in response to Dr. Mnene?
I think one needs to think about, I think the MVNOs and so on is an option. And I think, like I said, South Africa is choosing a different route to go down. That is a consideration. But I also think you need to be careful when you look at these things, because we were there. We had a whole level of what we call service provision, which essentially was you had the networks and then you had the service provision layer. But it's an expensive way to do it because there's a cost. So it's nice that the internet service provider, because you've got to look at it from their perspective, right? They want to make money. So they want to make money. They basically want to take a service from you, mark up the service and sell it. Now, again, we come down to what is the cost. So let's take a cost of a meg of data. How much does it produce you to produce that cost? So if you produce the cost at a particular rate, you're then going to add a margin onto that rate. You're then going to add it, sell it to the next, let's call it service provider or wholesale level. They're then going to add a margin and sell it to the customer, right? So that distribution cost was costing us 26 to 28%. That whole level has been done away with. So we bought everybody back. All the telcos have done the same thing. Brought all that whole level back to reduce the cost base at huge parts of doing it. So now do we want to recreate it and we buy it back again? Or do we want to make the price more expensive? Are we dealing with trying to make the price cheaper to the customer, or are we trying to make the price more expensive to the customer? Because this proposal doesn't make it cheaper. This proposal makes it more expensive. So that, I don't quite get the logic of ISPA. I understand why they want it, because it's nice to be able to get someone else to put all the investment in and then say, okay, look, I'll just ride on your back and essentially put a markup on and sell it. Great business model, but it doesn't necessarily make sense for what this hearing is about, or necessarily for the consumer in South Africa.
But their argument is that this has made sense in relation to telecom, and this emanates from the telecom settlement agreement with the Competition Commission. They said it has made perfect sense within the context of that market, and that model could be replicated.
It's a very different context. In telecom, you had a monopoly that went for 100 years. Okay, so you had a monopoly that had been going for 100 years, that have infrastructure that was well-based. And essentially, the fixed calls talk about, that's all telecom still. As a corporate, you can't not have telecom in your business. Just look at the Competition Commission. I'm sure your phones are still with telecom. And reason for that. So that's the one part. So when you're wholesaling that, it's because of what they've had. We must sell this thing at next to nothing in a situation where we're already under pressure. In South Africa, we want the price of data to drop. Therefore, give us the tools to be able to make it drop. ISPA is not going to make the cost of data drop, or any of those providers, or any other provider is not necessarily going to drop it unless they're prepared to put the investment into the networks. It's not a complicated thing. To be honest, it's quite simple. You have to put the investment into the network so you have the capacity. You've driven down the cost of the data, of the carrying cost of a gig, and then you can sell it. Then the competition can say, are you making a disproportionate margin? That's a fair question to ask, right? But that's not the case. And that's not the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is we're faced with higher prices because we've got higher costs. Let's drive the cost down so we can get the price down and solve the consumer issue.
Yeah, if I may just make a further follow-up question on this, because what the submission is referencing is that because there is concentration at the wholesale level, you need to address the competition issues at wholesale level in order to be able to reduce costs. That sounds like a very sensible proposition. That this is one avenue of actually reducing data costs.
There isn't concentration in the mobile network because you've got the ability to go to any of the 6 operators. So any ISPA can go to Telkom. If Telkom loves their model of that they're doing on fixed, I'm sure they'd be very willing to do it on mobile as well. Now, maybe you should put that question to them. Why then don't they open it on mobile as well? Which would be a good part. The question, the point I'm trying to make is that there isn't a concentration of wholesale parts, because all you're going to do is, if you do that, if you say, right, let's create a vertical, you have a network layer, let's create a service layer. The service layer wants to make a margin. That margin means someone's going to pay more. So if it costs me 100 to produce a gig of data as an example, right? So that's my cost. Now I add on the margin. Say my margin is 20%, so now I make it 120. What do you think the next level is going to do? They're going to put on a margin. So you're making the thing more expensive in the cost of a gig of data, not less expensive. We have wholesale parts. We offer